Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlie Johnson. As mentioned, I am the head of the Fargo-Moorhead Convention and Visitors Bureau. I promise not to ask too many questions about tourism leaders. Maybe one. We'll see. Let's introduce our panelists. First of all, I think you know them, you love them, so let's get them up here. Starting in the House, we have Majority Leader Al Carlson. Come on up, Leader Carlson. Thank you. It's okay to applaud a little, right? Minority Leader Representative Cory Mock. Cory? Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Senator Rich Wardner, the Senate Majority Leader. Senator? Good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. And the Senate Minority Leader Joan Heckaman. Joan, nice to meet you. Thank you for coming, Senator. Appreciate it. Okay. We're going to try to avoid filibusters today, right? We have quite a bit of ground to cover. I know we won't be able to cover it all, but of course we'll do our best to get to as many things as we can. I appreciate you being here. Thank you all very much for inviting me. I feel I made a bold-fashioned statement today. I wore navy blue pants and brown shoes, so don't judge me on that. It's a good thing I'm standing behind the podium. I could have gotten away with it. Okay, we're going to start out, I think, with some current events. I ran this by Andy ahead of time because I don't want to, surprise anybody. But the debate over race in America, the tragedy in Charlottesville, they're really not that far away. All you have to do is look at the Fargo Forum this morning to know that's true. And I haven't seen the other papers, but it's probably there too. A Fargo man who marched with white nationalists in Charlottesville, he has apparently hinted to a relative he's thinking about bringing a rally to Fargo. And of course, there's already talk of counter-protests. At the same time, a man with a long history of hate speech, recently released from prison, said by a granddaughter to be looking to take up residence in a school building in Culm. So we've got large cities, smaller cities being affected by this. And there's Craig Cobb, still trying to buy a town, apparently, and so on. So there's a long history of various movements in the state, some of which have even been involved in violence. So racism, white nationalism, anti-Semitism, they're all around us. They're not just somewhere else. They're not just on the East Coast. Not in the South. And I want to specify, I'm not looking for a critique of who's taking what position in the national debate. That's really not what I'm after here. I'm just looking for each of you to give us an idea of how you as leaders feel perhaps you and your parties should respond when events like this happen around the state. And I'll start with you, Leader Carlson.
Well, yesterday I happened to have the privilege, I hosted Joel Heitkamp's show yesterday, and we called one of the council members at Culm, where all this news centers are about the fact that they bought a school building. It's the family of the man who kidnapped the girls and the family. And he honestly had no idea. They said that he had no interaction with the people, and they had no idea that anything was going to be taking place there. So hopefully we're not chasing ambulances. But in the national news, and when you look at North Dakota, we just came off of a 190-day protest down at the Apple, where we didn't have laws on the books that would properly deal with some of the things that happened down there. The anti-masking regulations and things like that. We didn't have any of those. So we passed a few bills to tighten that up. But there's always been a fine line in government between free speech and the right to assemble and the right for a violent protest, which in my opinion, there is no right for that. So there is no right or wrong side here. They're both wrong if they're doing it. If there's violence involved, we need to be firm. We need to be rapidly acting on these things, allow people to freely protest, but not violently. And if that happens, I think we need to make sure our law enforcement officials know we are 110% behind them, and the citizens are behind them in making sure that this always remains a peaceful event.
Okay, thank you. Leader Mock, how about you?
Well, so I don't know if my wife or new senior policy advisor, 7-week-old son, Grayson, are here. They were here a moment ago. I think they had to step out for a little bit. But when all that occurred on Saturday, by the way, we want to make sure that he does get a chance. We figure that's the one way to truly keep everyone smiling is bring a baby to a policy summit, right? On Saturday, we were visiting family in South Dakota, and we had heard about what had happened in Charlottesville. And it caused us to pause. We were spending time with family. We didn't watch the news much. But as the evening went on and through Sunday, we learned more of what had been happening on Friday night and Saturday. of course, I just felt sick to my stomach to think that anyone would have been injured or there was any lives lost over a violent demonstration. I would agree. I think we'd all agree that any violent protests and demonstrations should be condemned and should never be tolerated. We want to make sure that there's rule of law and that we do preserve free speech. But I thought of Grayson, and I thought, here's a 7-week-old, my 7-week-old son, our first child, has grown up and has never. He never questions, what job you have, how much you make, what color your skin is, are you a male or female? He doesn't ask, what religion what do you believe in? That is of no importance. It doesn't even exist in his world. The fact, and when I look at it and where we are, we can't stop, the four of us and anyone in this room, we ourselves cannot stop what happened in Charlottesville. We can't prevent violent protests, but we can ask is the hard questions of why are people in this country feeling the need to cast blame, and what is causing the feeling of insecurity? And I think that, we need to condemn what occurred and make sure that we're saying that is not, America is not a place for us to scapegoat and to shift blame and say that these people aren't welcome because these people are somehow the cause of our problems, when in reality, I think there's bigger issues and underlying issues that we need to address. So I really look at what are the insecurities that exist in this country, and are we really having the conversation we need to have to prevent this from happening in the future? I certainly hope that any demonstrations that occur, whether it's in Fargo, Culm, Leith, you name it, are peaceful, that I hope that if people need to demonstrate, make their points heard, that they're heard, but that there is rule of law is respected, and that there's a better conversation to address the underlying problems afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Senator Wardner?
Well, I would just like to say that with social media, it has helped people that are real, they're not content with life, and they have issues, and some of them have mental problems, let's face it. They're able to network, and also they're able to say things on social media that they would never say directly to a person's face. So it's opened up a brand new world where they can express themselves and kind of get it off their chest. And I just want to tell you that all four of us up here experienced that through the session and in between sessions. For example, on the medical marijuana bill, I was told many times to get my head out of the sand and out of a few other places. And but what you do is we try to reach out to these people in a very diplomatic way. We try to set an example. Instead of firing back some derogatory term, we tend to keep it on a professional level and explain why we did what we did and treat them with respect. So I guess that's my message. We continue to treat them with respect.
Thank you. Senator Heckerman?
I would agree with Senator Wardner. I think respect is one of the big things that we need to have. Even in the Capitol building when we're discussing issues on bills and whatever, my highest priority is respect. Respect for everybody that brings an issue forward and their thoughts and their ideas, and I try to address those. And I agree with Representative Mock. I don't know how we've gotten to the place in our society where we aren't able to bring issues forward and speak to them on a civil basis, on a daily basis. So that's something that I hope that our schools are going to have to address too, and we put a lot on our schools for things that they have to do. But we need to teach our children that if you have a confrontation with someone, you need to sit down civilly and solve it. One of the best pictures I saw on Facebook this last week was 3 little kids hugging each other, and they were all of different races. And they had no prejudices and they had no disagreements. And I think that's the place where we need to get to be.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts? Anybody on that? Move on? Okay. Let's talk about your parties. They're standing in their state, maybe a little bit vis-a-vis national, but I think mostly in terms of the state here. Obviously, there's a GOP supermajority in the House and Senate. Can it last? Should it last? We've seen fractures among GOPers in the House and Senate in D.C. for sure. And is it possible that we have elements of that in Bismarck? So we'll talk to the Republicans first here. So let's start with Senator Wardner.
Well, we're all human. We all have difference of opinions, and that's one of the things about the Republican Party. It's a very diverse party. And I guess that's all right, and as far as I'm concerned, that people are going to have different opinions within the party, and we have to try to work them out. So, do I think that this is going to continue? No, I believe at some point this is going to change, and the Democrat, the minority party now in both chambers, is probably going to increase their numbers, and it's not all bad because they provide a healthy debate. They also provide looking at the other side, and they also keep the minority, or the majority, excuse me, from going through and double checking their work. And I will have to say this, even though our colleagues here that are in the minority, they work hard. There aren't as many, but they work hard and they try to make sure that they keep the checks and balances in there. So it's going to change over time. It will.
Okay. Leader Carlson, talk about fractures in your own party. I believe I read something toward the end of the session where you and Senator Wardner weren't getting along on everything, agreeing on everything. So
I think that's
did I
standard.
read that correctly? Yeah.
I think it's standard operating procedure that there's differences, and I agree with Senator Wardner that, you know, they always talk about the big tent party being the Democratic Party, but I can tell you from my perspective, we have an extremely big tent in our side of the aisle, and we have a very diverse group from the very conservative to the very moderate, and they're all within our 81-member caucus. Now, you have to remember that, will this change over time? I'm not sure. I've been there since 1993 when Ed Schaefer was elected, and we had as few as 65 members, and we've had the high of 81 members, and in all those 13 sessions after that, since then, we've had some number in between there. And each time we take our message to the voters, and we weren't appointed. We stood in front of the electors and said, here's what we believe in, here's our vision for the state of North Dakota, and we were elected. So could it change? It could. But on the other hand, we all have to take, no matter who it is, we have to take our message to the voters and say, here's how we're going to take this state forward. You heard the governor talk about his vision for the state. We have to do the same thing. I'm concerned about continuing to elect Republicans. That's my job. But I also want to make sure that the Republicans understand that we stand for something. We stand for limited government and free enterprise and individual rights and responsibilities. There are things we must stand for if you're going to be in that tent. And I would say Representative Mock, if you asked him, would tell him that during the session we communicate a lot. We don't always agree, but our role is not to dominate. Our role is to share information, and when we come to vote, it's probably going to be different on some issues, but that's how we're supposed to govern.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Senator Heckman. Let's talk a little bit about the Democratic Party, obviously on the other end of that spectrum. How do Democrats regain more of a competitive edge going forward, and how is it working with that supermajority in the Senate?
I think we've had a good working relationship. I told the Senate at the end of the session that coming in, I thought I'd get a little legislative leverage with Senator Wardner because he and my husband are good friends from college days. And I said my husband knew a lot of stories about him in college. And he said, I don't think that'll happen because I know more about your husband. So I didn't get any legislative leverage. However, I think we, in the Senate, we have a good working relationship. When I see a piece of legislation, I don't look at it specifically as a Republican or a Democrat piece of legislation. I look at it, how is it good for the state of North Dakota? Will it benefit us going down the road? And I also look at it a little different. If you look at the other three members up here in leadership, they're all from urban areas, and I serve a rural district. And so I have to remember to always look at the rural aspect of pieces of legislation because there are a few differences in how legislation affects us out in the rural areas. And it has to do a lot with service areas, and maybe we'll discuss that later, I don't know.
Representative Mock?
Well, it's, yeah, and I think Joan and I would have a similar position, that we certainly, I think we both agree that tighter numbers, closer split, regardless of who is in the majority, would be better for the state of North Dakota. I was elected in 2008, my very first session, and in that session, I was one of 36 Democrats in the House. We had 58 Republicans. It was 58 to 36, which if you look at those numbers, just organically, with no context, you go, well, there's a clear majority-minority. But you look today and you see it's 81-13 in the House. If we thought that it couldn't get any worse than 58-36 or however the number changed over time, maybe we went down to 25, 23, 23, and now 13. Yes, it always can get worse. So never let the words say this is as bad as it'll ever get. Never let those words enter your thought process. But I will say that change will occur. Our party, just as the majority party, are largely by the public, are defined by our national parties. For better or for worse, we are defined by how the public perceives our two brands. And the bulk of our constituents and our neighbors get their news from national news sources. They still may read the local paper or listen to local radio, but the bulk of their news comes from national sources, which means, again, for better or for worse, we are defined by our national brands. So the North Dakota Democratic NPL Party, despite what you may hear on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, the North Dakota Democratic NPL Party, we are very supportive of small business. We are pro-responsible energy development. We want to see North Dakota's economy become stronger, and we believe that we have policies that would do so. For us, it's a matter of overcoming those national differences, getting our candidates out to speak to a few things. One thing I actually want to just end with is, and this may have been frustrating for some, especially legislators, perhaps even more in my caucus, that while the majority leader said that his job is to elect Republicans, I took a different approach this session in my first year as minority leader. My job isn't to elect Democrats. My job, after the campaign, is to govern. I think all of our jobs is to govern. That should be our primary focus. So when I'm spending time with members beyond our caucus of 13, it's not because I don't want to spend time with Democrats or I want to work more with Republicans. We have a job to do with 93 other members in the House and 47 senators, and we can't do a job effectively on behalf of North Dakotans unless we work together and put the partisan labels aside. The campaign will happen in due time, but it's time to govern, and that was my approach this session, and I hope it's an approach that we all continue to take moving forward.
We're starting to get some comments on the board here. You haven't seen them yet, and I told Andy this is a new experience for me. If you start to see comments showing up on the screen, it could probably distract a moderator pretty heavily. So I'm going to try to stick with things that are within the topic that we're on as much as I can. But someone mentioned when you have this much of a majority, it's completely unhealthy. It makes us so homogenous. I think we've kind of dealt with that here. Second one, though, change is good. Term limits. Anybody have any thought on term limits? Some people serve a long time. Senator?
I think term limits come every 4 years when you're up for election. I think that's an opportunity for your voters to decide whether you've done a good job for them and whether you're representing their district, and that's your job when you're in Bismarck, is to represent your legislative district. But also, are you good with working together down there? I take great stock in what the lobbyists do, what the chamber does, the issues that you bring forward. And all of those things have to go together to make a good legislator, and I think your term limits are your election.
Okay, anybody else want to tackle that one?
I would just like to make the comment that if you take a look at the House and the Senate and look at the longevity of most of the legislators, it's not very much. In fact, there are a few of us that have been around for a while. I grant that, but I want to tell you, there's a purpose for that. Institutional memory. Ray Holmberg has a lot of institutional memory. And believe me, it comes in and helps us many times.
Of course.
Well,
Leader?
I interact with a lot of leaders from around the country, and I can tell you that the states that have term limits have a terrible time governing because they move from one chamber to the other. And what they do is they empower the bureaucrats and the agencies, because there is not the knowledge base there 4 or 6 or 8 years. As they move chamber to chamber, it becomes just a matter of hopping back and forth, and I don't think it's good government when they're all done. Speaking of longevity, I just have to mention that our thoughts and prayers go out to Bill Kretschmar, a long-term legislator, passed away today in a Bismarck hospital, and those be the new Bill. He was a prince of a man. There was no better representative for the state of North Dakota in the district than Bill, so we're really going to miss that guy.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Corey, you want to answer?
Yeah,
anything?
and I I mean, I actually would completely agree with the majority leader. When you look at other states that have term limits, the problems that are unique to North Dakota are not solved by term limits. They're not unique to North Dakota as much as we may think they are. And term limits that have been passed in other states, they have similar challenges even to this day, despite having term limits. One of the biggest changes that we could make. Right now, there is essentially very little difference electing a House and a Senate member. We all serve the same districts. We serve 4-year terms. There's a little bit of difference procedurally in some of the responsibilities that the Senate has that the House may not, but effectively it's the same. And I'd actually like to see us get to the point, move back and have 2-year House terms, give people a chance to campaign, and they can have their. And I can only imagine.
Know how hard we worked to get that.
I bet it wasn't easy. And,
Oddly enough, there's disagreement up here on Sunday.
can you believe it? But I think it would be better for the people of the state. I think it'd have better, more responsive government if the House, at the very least, were up in front of voters every other year instead of every 4.
Okay.
Just one last comment, Charlie.
Okay.
And go back to Senator Wardner. On an average, we change between 20 and 25% of the chamber's turnover every election cycle. So we have a real significant turnover in the House. With 3 terms or less, it's almost 70% of the legislators have had 3 terms or less. And I think that in itself proves that there's a tremendous turnover amongst people. In fact, it's very hard to recruit candidates because the pay is not a lot, and they have to leave their jobs, so you're trying to recruit candidates, and this becomes very difficult to get people to want to leave for those 80 days, because when you're in it, you don't get home and get your job done. So we don't need those.
And we'd like to all thank you for that, to all of the lawmakers who do make that commitment. We understand it's a big commitment. A couple questions popping up here. One's about energy. We're going to get to that. But there's one up here that just popped up. What are you doing to support the governor's agenda? So I actually was going to slide something in that I didn't have in here before about tech issues, since the governor talks a lot about tech issues. Leader Carlson mentioned that to me as we came in. That's an important thing to this governor. So I guess you can combine those 2 questions. What are you doing to support the governor's agenda, and how specifically enamored are you with the idea of doing things on a state level, because you're going to have to do some funding to lead to more technology options and opportunities across such a vast and rural state? We'll change it up a little bit. Let's start with Representative Mock this time.
Well, ever since I've been elected, I feel like the mantra of our party has been pass the governor's budget. I think it's been, the minority party has been the largest cheerleader of the governor's policies and initiatives since Governor Hoeven, through Governor Dalrymple, and now with Governor Burgum. With the Burgum administration, and we're still feeling it out, and that was, I feel like after the primary, there wasn't a lot of doubt in terms of how the November election was going to shake out. Conventional wisdom would suggest that Representative Marvin Nelson, as the Democratic candidate, it would have been the upset of a century had he won, and Senator Heckman would become lieutenant governor. They ran a vigorous campaign, but we knew largely what the trends were in North Dakota. So the governor, I could imagine, had a lot of preparation time in anticipation of his victory in November. That said, he's still new to the role. He's never served. He has a lot of new cabinet members. With that, we haven't seen a lot of the specific details that come into enacting the governor's agenda with policy. Budget we've seen, and we worked on this session, and there was some disagreement on that. But when it comes to, say, like the Main Street Initiative, looks great, and we want to see small businesses grow. But in terms of what that means or what's needed for policy, there was never any policy recommendations that came up. So it's really hard to say whether or not we would stand in favor of any of the changes. I do think that we do need to be responsive, innovative. We need to encourage more business growth and diversify the economy. These are all great platitudes. It's a question of how you do it. The devil's in the details, but we're supportive of the idea of change.
I'm not waving at you. It's
I know, it's
fruit fly
that's
that's
right.
on my head. It's like,
I thought you were waving at him.
it's like buzzing. Okay. All right. Well, and everybody knows, I mean, the budget that you guys started out with, that wasn't Governor Burgum's budget. Obviously, that was Governor Dalrymple's budget. So we're kind of waiting to see, but I suppose you got a hint today of what kind of things will be in it. Senator Wardner, you want to tackle that?
Well, I would just like to say that when Governor Burgum made the cuts, we embraced that in both the House and the Senate. We went and in there and took a look at it, and we were pleased with the work he had done, because we had to make some more cuts. And so we worked together with him on that. And what we're doing now is, keep in mind, he was only the governor for a short period of time before the last session. So as we go forward, it's during this 2 years that he starts setting his policy, and we're watching, and I think personally that the governor is very active. He's out there trying to make things happen. He is leaving no stone unturned, which I really appreciate. And I think that he's also learning a little bit about government. Government doesn't work like a corporation or a business. There's a little difference there. You got a board of directors that's called the legislature, and they have a specific job to do. And so he's learning to work with us. Personally, I embrace all the work he's doing. And on technology, if this state is going to move forward, we need to get into the technology. But I would like to say that we have laid or set the table in technology in many ways. So it's not a big step into some of the things that he is proposing.
Okay, back to Leader Carlson. How do you, I mean, obviously, when the governor was elected, there was some animosity even among his own party because he ran against your nominated candidate and talked about how things needed to change. So given that, now that you're going to be looking at his true agenda in the next couple of years, how do you think that's going to go going forward? And do you support him on those technology issues?
You know, it all depends. There's a cost to everything. You have to look at, our job is to balance the budget and to grow the North Dakota economy. And I can tell you that the topics from the time I started till today really haven't changed. For good or for bad, we're still talking about economic development, growing our economy, and we're still talking about filling the workforce shortage. I mean, we've done a lot of things. We've tried different directions. I think that a breath of fresh air is good. I think that the governor, and I agree with Senator Wardner, I don't believe that he had the opportunity to create an agenda in the last session. I mean, he inherited a budget. He had to deal with that budget. He made a couple of adjustments that he wanted. By the way, we didn't pass either one of them, and not intentionally, but when he wanted the provider tax and when he wanted to have 5% participation by the public employees on their health care, neither one of those two initiatives got passed during the session, and we balanced the budget. But we're 100% behind the innovation part. But we also need not leave behind the tech sector, the workforce sector when it comes to, we need to redirect our 2 years colleges. You know, we need electricians, we need plumbers, we need technicians, we need welders across the state. And we need to up our game on that whole thing. And we worked with Board of Higher Ed, and they had an initiative to look at the reorganization of those 5 campuses. And 11 campuses is a big burden for a little state of 740,000 people. So we need to get more focused on that, and we need to diversify. But ag is always going to be king, and energy is going to be king. And we just need to have another leg for that stool, like Senator Hoeven said yesterday at the tech conference. So we're going to do the best we can to work with him to try and mesh all those together as we go into the next session.
Okay, we're going to come back to that higher education component. In fact, I'll move it up the list since you brought it up. But Senator Heckman, do you have any comment about the governor's budget and specifically technology issues?
Well, I embrace the technology part of it, especially because it's important in our rural areas. You know, we keep connected around the world. We have high-speed digital in our rural areas. Everybody can be connected if they want to be. However, on the other hand, in my rural area, I have some elderly people, not considering me with my white hair, that are not as tech savvy as the younger generation is. And it's not convenient for them to go on the internet and shop. It's not convenient to order their medications over the internet. It's not convenient for them to do telemedicine. And so my concern is, are we still providing those services to everybody in the state who deserves those services and has a right to those services? And so the relationship I'm a little scared of is, if we go too techie and too innovative in some areas, are we going to lose that personal touch that's so important to connect, especially in the classroom? I think there's nothing that can replace a good teacher in a classroom. And that's an issue that's concerning me.
Okay, let's jump back to education, since Leader Carlson brought it up. apparently you are among the few politicians who, statewide, who have dared touch that third rail, you know? Should we consolidate, should we reconsider the way higher education is configured about the state? I think I looked it up, 3 of 4 regional universities have fewer than 1,500 students. 2 of the 5 community colleges have fewer than 1,200. So with all of the work shortage that we have going on in the state and the various different campuses, is this a time, is it a prudent time to have a serious discussion at the legislature, and is the legislature ready? We already know that the governor says education shouldn't be viewed strictly as its own form of economic development in these communities. So let's talk about that topic a little bit. Representative Mock, let's start with you.
I think we always need to be open to the conversation. Education is, it's easily one of the largest issues. It's one of the largest budgets we deal with financially. Policy-wise, I mean, there's 11 cities across the state of North Dakota that are directly affected by those public institutions. There's half a dozen more colleges and campuses that are not affected directly by the state, but indirectly, just with our investment towards education, our approach towards education. If we go down the path, one of the risks of if we ever looked at reducing or eliminating any of the smaller schools or eliminating duplication of some programs, which could result in the closing of one of the colleges, there is a ripple effect to that. I mean, I know it's easy to pick on some of your smaller campuses, Mayville State, or I saw President Richmond in the back, College of Science, and the problem with every going to one of the smaller communities that has one of the colleges, be it a 2 or 4 year school, that if you lose that, the effect that that's going to have on that city's economy. I mean, that may be one of the few anchors that remain in one of those communities. And I think of Mayville, and that's one of the largest drivers of workforce development, and it's one of the largest employers in the county. So there is consequences to that action. But we should, are there efficiencies? Do we need to have as many services? Can we bring the training and workforce development closer to homes so that you don't have someone who needs to travel from Tioga all the way to Wahpeton to get training as a diesel mechanic, but they can get that training at Williston State? And I know those programs exist, but how can we do that more and eliminate some of the duplication? But then also, it is a little, there is some cognitive dissonance there, but regionalize and I think empower your 2-year community colleges and actually give them a little more autonomy to train workforce and then feed into the 4-year system.
Okay, Representative Carlson.
Well, this has obviously been an issue that I've looked at for a long time. We tried to change the focus of the board. We tried to change the how we look at the campuses by removing their names out of the Constitution, so we were allowed to be more flexible. But you must realize that we are basically the funding arm of higher education, and the policy side of higher education, other than some things we dabble in a little bit, is created by the Board of Higher Education. And I can tell you that they, the last few meetings that I've had with them, there's been a talk about the reorganization of our tech schools. And I hope they do that, because do we need 5 campus presidents? You bring up a discussion like that, and right away there's people saying, oh, you're going to close them. There's no intent to close them. The intent is to try and organize and make them more efficient and fill the workforce holes that are there and meet those needs that everybody says, I've got to have these people and I need them in 9 weeks. And we need to be able to react to that and say, in 9 weeks, I'm going to have that person for you. And right now, I don't see that as being as much of an opportunity. So, yes, we need to take a look at higher education. We, per capita, North Dakotans fund per capita the highest amount in the nation per capita into higher education. But the last statement I'll make is that we need to not also forget K-12. This is a system. They need to be providing these kids the knowledge, the interest, the ability to look at all these different professions besides being a computer operator, and give them that exposure to that and tie that together with these trade and tech schools, because the face of higher education is changing and we're going to run out of kids, Charlie, because everybody can get their degree online if they try hard enough. And the campuses and the dormitories, we've watched them close them down across the system because they're not having as many kids living on campus. And those issues need to be addressed, because it's an issue that's coming. We want the very best for our kids. And the state of North Dakota and the legislature has invested record numbers in K-12 and higher education in the last 15 years. And we expect results, is all we expect for those investments for our citizens.
Okay, let's keep going on this topic. Senator Wardner.
All right. Well, I agree with Al that they got to continue. The Board of Higher Ed has to continue to be continually looking at what's going on in higher ed. But I would like to point out that we have 5 community colleges, and most of them have vocational programs there. They're spread out strategically throughout the state, and I think that's critical so that we can train those people. There's some people that won't go and be trained if it isn't close by. So I think having them in certain areas of the state is a benefit to us. And then you have the 2 research universities, and they have a job to do. I wonder, you want to talk about something that costs us a lot of money, that medical school. The medical school costs the state of North Dakota a lot of money. But you know what? We have doctors, maybe costing us a lot, but we have one of the finest medical schools in the nation. And both the research universities have a lot of things. For example, I just need to get
Okay.
off on my...
17 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a lot of topics.
Don't
I've got a
forget,
follow-up.
don't forget the aerospace program up at UND. Thank goodness Tom Clifford allowed John Odegaard to develop that. And look at what it has developed into. There's a lot coming back to the state there. The EERC, which is affiliated there. The medical school, top notch. North Dakota can be proud of that. Move down to Fargo, the ag research down there, the pharmacy program, the engineering program, top notch. And they make North Dakota proud, and they are bringing dollars into the state. Okay, now the last 4, the 4 used to be called teachers' colleges. Lord, do we need teachers? We need math teachers. We need science teachers, the STEM curriculum. We need good social studies. We need language arts. And our schools are out there looking for teachers now in certain areas. So I don't know. I think they're doing the job, and I think we need to keep them all. But yes, they need to be constantly looking at their mission.
So,
I'm done.
I'm going to get to you, Senator Heckman, but a follow-up comes up into my head there. So we're talking about, you mentioned Dr. Richmond and his program in Wapaton and how he also has a program in Fargo. They'd really like to build a new facility in Fargo. You talked about how important it is to have the regional training centers, and certainly that's true. But there are between 5,000 and 6,000 jobs open in the Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo area. So that's, the biggest conglomeration of jobs open. Do you think that maybe it would make sense to put a little extra into that facility in order to help get those people in the area where the jobs are? Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah. I'm giving you one more. As
I
long as you
agree-
don't go quite as long.
I
You're good.
agree with that because sometimes you got to take the programs to where the people are.
Right.
Just what I said in my other comments. You got to have these positioned around the state so that the young people will take advantage of them. And there are, believe it or not, there are at-risk students in the high schools that aren't going to drive to Wapaton, but they will take up
sure.
classes in Fargo.
Okay. Wait, I got to go back to Senator Heckman first. She didn't get a shot.
What was the question? No, I got the question.
You know where we are.
Right, I know. I think that the university system does a good job. I agree with Senator Wardner on the teacher training programs that we have in the state. They're very good. In fact, that's a lot of our teachers go out of state. A lot of our trained individuals are recruited by other states because of the higher salary schedules in those states, and we're losing some of our young people to that. On the other hand, looking at Wapaton and all of the programs that, like Lake Region has Precision Ag and some of those, it's hard to move those out into another area of the state, and I think that the university system is trying that. I know that one of the issues that I heard a lot about during the session was dental assistants, not dental hygienists, but dental assistants. And dental assistants can be trained in the chair, but the dentists prefer to have them trained on campus. And Western North Dakota is looking for a program for that, and just the equipment alone is one of the issues. So I think that's being looked at the university system, and I'm completely confident that our schools are doing a great job across the state.
Okay. Did you want to add something? I'm going to give you like 30 seconds.
Yeah, it was just the fact, I think it's going to be, Governor Burgum has had some comments about higher education's got to change its model and up its game. It'll be interesting to see what his proposal is. Right. The last thing, I think, the campus in Fargo, obviously in my backyard, that to me is exactly why we need to look at the reorganization of our trade and tech schools and make that part of the system like Minnesota has, so that we're all on the same page, driving the bus in the same direction. And it would be easier to do that if we had some reorganization of that system.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we're going to run out of time. I'm not going to get to everything. Let's see, what should I do next? Taxation, let's talk briefly about that. Well, let's talk taxation and incentives, because since the governor brought this up. By the way, I'm not going to ask this question because it'll seem self-serving, but thank you to whoever put that up there about tourism being the third largest industry in North Dakota, yet you cut their budget considerably. I'll just let you think about that one. Okay. Because, you know, I don't want to take this and make it my thing here, so. But shout out to Sarah Coleman, wherever she is. Or maybe she sent that question in. I don't know, Sarah? No, I'm just kidding. So let's talk about that incentive program. Like the governor was talking about how the Renaissance Zone in particular, he sees it as more of a direct incentive for infill, the kind of infill and Main Street initiative that he's talking about. Yet the Renaissance Zone legislation came under some criticism in the last session, and I believe it's the subject of an interim study, is it not? Correct? So how do you guys feel about that? I mean, I think you hear all sorts of people talk about this, pro and con, and you can't prove a negative. You can't prove what some people say, even some city officials say, when they say all of that development in downtown Fargo would have happened whether we'd had the Renaissance Zone or not. You can't prove that they're wrong, but it seems like it all came along together. So the question is, if you get that development and then it ultimately leads to an increased tax base, isn't that the good kind of thing to have? So who wants to start? I've lost track of who I started with last time. Senator Wardner, you want to start that?
Oh, I guess so.
How do you feel about Renaissance zones? Let's boil
Well,
it down to
first
that.
of all, don't forget, people, there was a lot of angst about TIF districts here in Bismarck and Renaissance zones, and it ran together. So it was in Fargo and Bismarck where the controversy was. And it's really the TIF district where the issues or where the debate is. The Renaissance zone, not so much. And I think that the Renaissance zones are doing the job where they're at. Because, let's face it, folks, you got a piece of property, if nobody does anything, that doesn't generate any property tax, it may lay there for 15 years. But if somebody comes in, gets it going, so they get a few breaks tax-wise. 10 years later, it's providing a tax base that no one even thought could happen. So I think the Renaissance zones pay for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Senator Heckerman.
I like the Renaissance zones, and in my area, that's what's helped some of our small towns rejuvenate some of the main streets. One of the issues that I have, and Corey's mentioned it too, is we get the image that our party is not for business and growth and tax incentives and so forth, and that's not really true. In my legislative district, I'm very cognizant of the fact that a majority of my businesses are small mom and pop businesses, and I'm always looking for a way to help them out and to see ways that we can give them tax breaks so they can keep going. Our bakery in town, in New Rockford, is a mom and pop. Our franchise hardware store is a mom and pop. Our pharmacy is a mom and pop that has a couple of places around the state. Our grocery store is a mom and pop. And so we look at that to keep our cities, our towns vibrant. There's not a lot of things we don't have, you know. And I look at Jamestown right now, and their mall is just a completely different mall than it was a year ago, and that's really going to hurt the town of Jamestown. So mom and pops are going to have to step up and provide those services. You know, when I look at my area, the only clothing I can buy in town is probably Carhartt. And so that's my Saturday night wardrobe if I don't go someplace else and shop. And I don't want to go someplace else and shop, but I have to sometimes. So Renaissance zones have helped keep our Main Street looking nice. I mean, the rejuvenation we did in Rockford with Renaissance money was really very well spent.
Okay. I'll stay on the Democratic side of the aisle. Representative
I
Mott?
think what you're going for is you're hedging your bets that the majority leader in the House is going to disagree with Renaissance zones. You're trying to keep it 3-4 and 1 against and not make it awkward. I'm not sure if you are or not.
I'm not that clever, Leader.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry.
Don't sell yourself short, Charlie. You managed to work a plug-in on tourism without working a plug-in on tourism, so you are much more
was
clever
the
than you give yourself
crowd.
credit for. I support Renaissance zones. You can abuse any incentive, and I don't think, because if it's not used properly, that shouldn't be a reason to get rid of it altogether. And I would actually even point out that, we incentivize our tax policies, whether there's a direct incentive or not, incentivizes certain activities. It is more cost effective right now, especially without a Renaissance zone, to develop on the fringes of Grand Forks or Fargo than it is to infill. And yet the city and taxpayers are going to have to pay for more infrastructure. It's more miles of road, more miles of sewer and stormwater. You're paying for it. We just don't account for it in a way that puts that cost up front. We treat all of our infrastructure as assets, but in reality they're liabilities, and we're not paying for them. So I think that the Renaissance zones, if used properly, and I hope that cities do use them properly, and that can actually encourage that infill, have denser communities, and be a little more effective use of the lands in our communities.
Leader?
I was one of the sponsors years ago on the Renaissance zones and the expansion of it. If you remember, Fargo had a very limited zone, and then we allowed more blocks to be put into that. And I think the legislature's responsibility when it comes to Renaissance zones, and by the way, other credits that were involved and that we're studying are Angel Fund tax credits, and we found a significant number of violations that they were not following our intent of the law. They were building apartment buildings instead of the things that we wanted built. So the state's responsibility is to look at the cost-benefit analysis on the part we give away. The Renaissance zone gives away, and the city can give away, enable real estate tax breaks. The state gives away income tax credits. So our view should be how we look at those income tax credits. Is there a cost-benefit analysis in the end for the state of North Dakota? And same with Angel Fund and all of those. And we have a committee that's looking at and we haven't often looked at cost-benefit analysis, and now we are. What is the return that the state gets, that the growth, the community gets by having these programs? And I think you'll find that most of them, especially the Renaissance zones, the value of future dollars has more than paid for itself in most of those communities.
Okay. So as long as you mentioned income taxes, short question, maybe short answers. Given what happened in the last legislative session, especially with the downturn in the oil industry, downturn in the ag industry, do any of you have any regrets that you cut the income tax 4 times in the last 4 years? 4 sessions, I guess it is? Leader?
Should have been 5. No, the point was that you create a business climate in the state. We compete with all the states around us. South Dakota has no income tax. But yet we're trying to get those same credit card companies to come to North Dakota. So it's not only a matter of what our citizens get, it's competing to bring more citizens to North Dakota. We're still collecting more income tax, percentage-wise, because of the people's salaries have grown. The percentage went down, but the salaries have grown in North Dakota. I think that was the right move to reduce our corporate income tax, and there was a lot of blow-up about changing our corporate income tax because we were one of the few states that had the 3 or 4 level tax on corporations. And we went back to the single factor, which reduced our corporate income tax collection. But again, if a business is looking at Minnesota or a business is looking at North Dakota, they have the single tax factor in Minnesota. We do not. So there's also a competitive factor there. We were able to balance our budget. We were able to reduce most of our budgets by around 15%, and we held the human services area and the public educational area harmless, and we thought we did a great job with the revenue that we had in place, and I would recommend those tax cuts again.
Representative Mock?
Well, here's my biggest regret over the last 8 years is that we've been looking at taxes independently and not collectively. We talk about tax liability. It is not fair to say that we have lowered taxes when you lower one tax, but you shift the burden to something else. I mean, if your property taxes go up, but you lowered your income taxes, can you honestly say that if one action caused the other, that your policy lowered the tax rates? And we have looked at individual taxes and scrutinized them as individuals. But we as a state, we get over half of our state revenue comes from sales tax. We went from about a third of our revenue coming from income tax down to less than 20%. I think we're between 15 and 18%. So if we're looking at sustainability and good fiscal tax policy, good tax policy, we can't keep looking at taxes independently, but instead looking at them collectively, and that includes looking at state actions and how that affects local taxes, local revenues. Because while we may not collect property taxes, things that the state does will affect how much citizens are assessed taxes at the local level. And if you were one of the questions earlier was talking about recruiting young talent. You want to recruit businesses, you want to recruit people here to the state, you're going to have to look at everything, and that includes tax policy, and that's one thing that we need to do a better job at, is working with local subdivisions and having a holistic approach to tax policy, not the individuals that look good on a campaign postcard.
Okay, do either of you have significantly different things to say about this than your colleagues?
Well, I would say I agree with our cuts that we made, and the last thing I would like to say, and in all respect to Representative Mock, the state has worked hard to help with the property taxes. Remember, we took over 115 mills of local school property taxes with oil money, so we've shared that. So we have helped. We've been very concerned about property taxes.
Senator Heckerman.
My only comment is that whatever taxes that we do as a state of North Dakota, I'm concerned that we keep our young families here in the state of North Dakota. And if our tax policy has anything to do with chasing them out of the state, then we need to change it. Because we can't change our tax policy and expect them to pay more in property tax and pay more in health insurance or pay more in deductibles and co-insurance and stay in our state and have a smaller paycheck at the end of the month. So.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left, which probably isn't enough to get into any topic unless you want to let me go way over. Huh? Anybody? Okay. So thank you all. We didn't get to energy. That was going to be my next one, but next time, right? You can quiz them all about energy, about the interim study on wind and other alternative energies. I would like to thank these people for joining us. Let's give them a big round of applause. And thank you for all your comments on the screen. We need to put up a live poll. Let's see the live poll. Do you think North Dakota is on the right track or the wrong track? Let's text a keyword to 22333. Okay, there you go. Vote now, people. You guys don't have to wait around for this.
We can go?
Yeah.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yep. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Charlie.
Good job. Good job. Thank you. Senator, thank you very much. Thank you. Senator Warner, thank you. Good seeing you. All right. Thank you very much. And as the poll shows up, look at that. Oh, everyone likes it. Okay. I believe there'll be some more announcements from the back. Thank you. Thanks to Andy and the rest of the team here at GNDC for inviting me to take part in this. As usual, we could have gone on for a lot longer time, but enjoy the rest of your day. You got another great session coming up. Thank you.